Before we bring in our guest, I want to tell you something about the woman you are about to hear. An amiga whom we both admire deeply. She is the daughter and granddaughter of migrant farm workers from Fremont, Ohio, where she still resides. She became a civil rights attorney. She founded Justice for Migrant Women. She co-founded Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, the Latinx House, and Poderistas. And in November of 2017, she wrote a letter on behalf of 700,000 farm worker women to the women of Hollywood. A letter that Time magazine published, a letter that helped light the match on the Time's Up movement. She's the woman who spearheaded the national campaign for Latina Equal Pay Day. Y como si fuera poco, at 49, she is doing her PhD.
And what I want to make sure is told is that while the world was watching the Time's Up movement get bigger and louder, the women who wrote the original letter, Las Mujeres del Campo, stayed in the fields. Mónica has spent the years since making sure their names, their lives, their dignity stay in the conversation.
So when we talk about power in this episode, we are not talking only about the power that shows up in the red carpet, so that's fun. We are talking about power that gets built in the kitchen, in the legal aid offices, in church basements, where someone collects rent money for the woman who lost her hours that week, or for a family affected by the raids.
So if you've ever been the woman who holds everything together and then wondered who is holding you, this one is for you.
Mónica Ramírez, queridísima amiga, bienvenida a Her Wisdom Era.
Her Wisdom Era. Conversations for Latinas in Midlife.
Oh my gosh, what a huge honor. And I am excited for you. I'm excited for this and for all of us that we have this gift from both of you.
Y'all have to know that from the day that we launched, this woman has been liking, commenting, sharing, showing up. I mean, she is the real deal. And we're going to get real here today because that's what we do at Her Wisdom Era. So, Mónica, I want to take us back to your days in Fremont, Ohio, when you were a little girl, because we know that you're still living in Fremont, Ohio. But your family left the migrant stream and they stayed there where you're still at. And you grew up surrounded by the farm worker community, so essential in your life, and listening to their stories and witnessing their sacrifices. What was it that you, esa Mónica chiquita, that little girl, what were you hearing at your family's dinner table that other girls at school or in town weren't hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I feel so blessed that I was, raised by my family to be proud of coming from the farm worker community. And I was always surrounded by community because I was, my great grandmother, she babysat me, she raised my mother. And so my great grandparents were trusted community members. And every summer when farm worker community members would return to Fremont to work in the fields, they'd go to my grandparents' house first. So what I was hearing growing up, not just at the dinner table, but all around when I was at my grandma's house or with my tios and tias, one, it was about the work and how hard it was and whether it was a good season or a bad season or, some families that were struggling that needed support. It seemed like there was always some kind of like community fundraiser, like baking cookies, baking something. So I heard about community and the need to give back and the need to support. And also my parents, even though my siblings and I never had to travel the migrant stream, we never had to work in the fields in the same way that my parents and others had to work. They were very, very focused on ensuring that we did not forget where we come from. My mom said that all the time, never forget where you come from. And for me, that meant not only being Latina, being from a Latino family, but it really was about being from a farm worker family. And so I actually went to the farm worker casita where my dad lived growing up in Mississippi. And those were not things that my friends at school were hearing. We were only one family of, I think, 2 or 3 Latino families who went to my Catholic school where my parents put us. They sacrificed a lot to send us to that Catholic school. And, I thought everybody knew about the stuff that my family was talking about. And that, but then I quickly, as I grew up, realized, no, this reality that I'm living and that my parents are making sure that we know about our history, our culture, etc., it was not something that other people understood or had any reason to know about, really.
That's a wonderful story because we often forget where it all started, right? And it sounds to me that it all started right there at that dinner table where, your parents were making sure that you knew who you were and where you were coming from so you would never forget. But then after that, you went to Loyola, then you went to Ohio State Law, and then you went to Harvard Kennedy School. I mean, Boulder. But somewhere in there, at 25 years old, you created the first legal project in this country focused on sexual harassment against farm worker women. I want to ask you something that I do not think anyone has asked you on the record before. How are you treated in those rooms, Monica? And I mean, as a young Latina lawyer walking into legal aid offices, into courtrooms, into advocacy spaces in the early 2000s, telling rooms full of people that farm worker women were being assaulted in the fields and that we needed a legal strategy to stop it. How do you think they saw you when you had those conversations?
Well, I mean, before I even got to have the conversations, when I was in law school, I created the project that you mentioned, the Legal Initiative. I got a special fellowship to create it. It was my dream job. And I remember that year when I was graduating from law school, I was one of the first people in my class to get a job. And it was a very hard year for the market. And my job was diminished. People thought, oh, it's just legal services. Oh, it's easy. Oh, like almost as if I wasn't the same quality of lawyer as the other lawyers because of the work I was doing. And so that was challenging to kind of prove that the work that I cared about and that I knew was important, that it was in fact important and just as serious and legitimate as other kinds of work. And then, I just think that from the very beginning, there's two reactions to the work. One, before I even moved to Florida to start my practice, I got my first case because that's how widespread the problems of sexual violence against farmworker women was. So people were eager for the project and the community was very responsive. But on the other hand, particularly white community members, they didn't get it. They didn't understand who were farm workers. They didn't believe that there were farm worker women or that there could be farm worker women who had these kinds of problems. And then there were the people who, really questioned whether or not they deserved justice. I remember in one of the first big talks I gave in Florida, I was in an auditorium and actually it was after the movie, they'd screened the movie A Day Without a Mexican and I was on the stage and talking about the work. And a man came up to me afterward and he said, shouldn't they have to give up something? Talking about the sexual violence that they experienced because, he was basically trying to make the point that they came here as immigrants and they're taking from our country. So shouldn't they have to give something up? And that was the sentiment, that almost as if it was deserved. And so on the one hand, you had farm worker women who expected the violence as a term and condition of their work. It was just the norm. And on the other hand, you had people who thought, well, that's the consequence of their actions to come here. And as a lawyer, because I was very young, as you mentioned, and Latina, there were not very many Latina lawyers at the time. I remember there were times when there was a mediation that I was doing and the mediator refused to let me be in the room when we were negotiating the terms. So I was with a white woman attorney and who was on my side, and she wanted her to be the spokesperson for the case. She wanted her to be the only person in the room when negotiations were happening, even though it was my case and I was the lead attorney. So, I experienced ageism, but also a lot of racism in those early years. And it was a lot to hold to try to build something that in my mind was so urgent and pressing and had never been done in the way that I was trying to build it. And then also just the reality of being one of few in a space that wasn't created for me.
As I hear you talk, I feel that commitment to advocate for the female farm workers, specifically around sexual violence, there had to be a moment that really defined that commitment for you. And I wonder what that moment was.
Well, that was a journey. That moment came early in my life. And I think we've talked about this before, and I don't talk about it often, but, unfortunately, sexual violence is something that I've known most of my life. It's been an issue that's been around me most of my life, and domestic violence as well. And, my first legal project that I created was dedicated to my sister, because when we were little kids, my sister was sexually abused by our babysitters. And that has marked me my entire life. And it affected our family, growing up and still today. So my work is very personal. And knowing the incidents of sexual violence against farmworker women and that it still persists today, it's very painful to me that this is a problem that still exists. And I think about the ways in which I know it affected my sister's life, how it affected my life, my entire family's life. Unfortunately, I too am a survivor. Later in life, experienced domestic and sexual violence. And so this work for me is not just work. It is my mission. It is my vocation to put an end to this problem. And, I think that my commitment started early from a very young age, understanding the ramifications of violence like this. But over the years, it's continued to grow. My commitment is even stronger because of the women I serve and because of the stories that I've heard over these years.
Wow, Monica. Thank you for sharing all that. I know how vulnerable it feels when you have to incorporate the personal aspect of things into the work you do. But for you, it sounds like you found a way to heal with the work that you do. And it all makes sense, right? When I hear you say how your sister and yourself had to go through all that, and how you are trying constantly since you were a little girl to make sure that no other women have to go through this. So I thank you for that. I want to take a minute there and say that, because we either have been a victim of some sort of sexual or physical abuse, or we know someone very close to us who has been. So for the women listening, if they are a part of that, just know that we get it. We get it, and we hear you, and we see you. I want to go back to 2017 because it feels appropriate right now. So the Harvey Weinstein story had just, broken, and, women in Hollywood were speaking, and you were sitting with something that you knew had to be said, right? From a personal standpoint, but also from, a movement standpoint. Cuéntanos cómo nace esa carta, la Dear Sisters letter. How did it all start? And who were you talking to when you were writing it? Obviously, now I know that it's more personal, because I know you were not writing to Hollywood, I know you were writing for Las Mujeres del Campo. Who did you have in mind when you wrote the letter? Was it your sister, yourself, or who in particular?
Well, I want to make sure that all the credit is given to farmworker women, because they have been the ones leading this work. And the way the letter came about was, first, it wasn't supposed to be a letter. It was supposed to be a statement. But I was actually on a phone call with Suget Lopez, who is the executive director of Líderes Campesinas. We are one of a group of co-founders of Alianza Nacional de Campesinas. And at that time when she and I were speaking, it was because Time Magazine had come to me to ask me if I had any clients who wanted to be featured as a part of the silence breaker story that they were working on. They didn't tell me what the story was, but they had a story that they were working on, and they wanted to feature a farm worker woman. And they had someone who was very highly visible who was going to be part of the story, but the condition was that she would not join the effort if they did not have a farm worker woman involved. And so the person from Time contacted me. I was trying to determine who fit the criteria, because I had very specific criteria of who could be included. And I had then, had a call with Suget Lopez, and we were talking just about what we were hearing, the different people who were coming forward. And, Suget was sharing with me that she had been talking with some of the farm worker women in community. And they made the observation that, farm worker women and Hollywood women actually have a lot in common because they both were living in a paralyzed state. And that farm worker women were paralyzed because they lived in the shadows, and they had, the fear of retaliation and lots of other kinds of harm against them. And women in Hollywood were paralyzed because they were living, under the bright lights and out in the open. And so they made that connection. And, I said to Suget, I think we need to say something about this and bring that forward. And around the same time, there was going to be a march in Hollywood in support of the women who were coming forward, and they were experiencing retaliation for speaking out. And so we made the decision to organize to send 30 farm worker women to the march. And we asked the organizers if we could read a statement from the stage. And so the letter, what became the letter, was actually a statement that was to be read from the stage to women in Hollywood from Farmworker Women. But because of that intervention from Time Magazine that wanted to include Farmworker Women in their story, the reporter actually asked me to share the statement with them. And so before the statement was read at the march in Hollywood, Time Magazine actually ran it as the Dear Sisters letter.
How do you feel about where the movement is at now and how inclusive it continues or not continues to be with women farm workers?
So what I have been told is that for women in the entertainment industry, the letter, it kind of gave them a direction to work in, and it also gave them a bigger cause to lift up. Because if you remember at that time, people were kind of trying to minimize the fact that there were these very high profile, what are perceived to be very privileged people speaking out about sexual violence against them by Weinstein. And other people were saying, you don't have anything to complain about. You've got this great life. Like, what are you complaining about? And so they were getting a lot of that backlash. And when the letter came out, they were able to see it wasn't just them. It was other industries. It was farm worker women as well, and restaurant workers and others. And that then gave them a direction to work in and toward. And I think one of the most important and powerful things about that time was that we as a movement, as the farm worker movement, we wanted to be very clear that, first of all, while there were similarities between farm worker women and the women in the entertainment industry, there were big differences, and those needed to be highlighted. And the other thing was that there was almost this immediate reaction where it was like, people thought the women in Hollywood were helping the farm worker women. And it was sort of like, ay, las pobrecitas. Isn't it so nice that the women in Hollywood are helping the farm worker women? And we made it very clear that it was actually the farm worker women who were lending their power to the women in Hollywood. So during that time period, it was a very consequential time. And I think that the Me Too movement, it gave us all kind of this much larger umbrella to work under and to be part of. And then Time's Up, of course, was very specifically focused on the workplace.
Thanks so much for taking us through that. And it was important for us to talk about this here so that our listeners really understand where you come from, because you have your hands in so many things, right? This also led to what is the Latinx House, this movement that you created where storytelling, you utilize the power of storytelling, the power of Hollywood, to make sure that you're centering the people that need to be centered at every time. I think that in the moment that we are right now, there is no way to talk about your work, Mónica, and to talk about the farm worker movement without talking about what has happened a few months ago. And we're talking about Dolores Huerta, right? Who at 95, she used the power of storytelling to finally tell her own truth, to finally shed her silence, which is what I think impacted me the most. The fact that she carried silence about Cesar Chavez for almost 60 years, and that she did it because other women had come forward first. And she said that their courage gave her the courage to speak up. And I can only imagine, Mónica, that this hit you differently than it hit most of us. And it hit us all really hard, right? Because you have spent your life working alongside Las Campesinas, and you are a civil rights attorney who has built, their first legal project in this country for farm worker women, as we've been talking about. So I want to ask you, aquí de mujer a mujer, de amiga a amiga, from a deep place of love and respect for the movement that you were part of and for Dolores, how are you holding this? And I mean this as a leader and also in the personal level.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, for so many of us, as you mentioned, it's devastating, and it's devastating in many ways, right? When I learned about Dolores, I was heartbroken. I love Dolores. I've known Dolores since I was, 20 years old, and I grew up looking up to her. And so to hear, and I've spent so much time with her working on this issue and other work. And so to hear this so many years later, my heart broke, because as you're saying, I can't imagine what it was like for her to have to hold that and to always be so strong and to always, put everyone else's interest before her own. Like, I can't even imagine what that must have felt like. And as a friend, right, I was like, how did I miss it? How did I not know? Like, could I have done better? Like, to help support better, you know? So I was feeling a lot of pain in that way, just like almost feeling like maybe like, did I let her down by not being able to support her, you know? But in terms of the work, you know, I feel, because it's not over, it's still ongoing, right? I feel an extraordinary amount of pressure to make sure that we understand the moment that we're living in, and that we actually handle it appropriately, in the sense that, like, we have to manage the fact that we are witnessing one of our greatest heroes fall. And there are consequences to that. Like, there are emotional consequences, there are, you know, societal consequences. Cesar Chavez, in many ways, has been the stand-in for an entire community of people. You know, Cesar Chavez was the stand-in for the farmworker community in the history books and other things. And so we have to recognize, like, what does it mean for him to fall as a hero, but also what does it mean for the rest of the farmworker community to ensure that the community is not erased, that the work is not erased, that the movement is not erased or minimized. There's that pressure and that work. But there's also this reality that you have courageous survivors who've come forward to disclose violence against them decades after the fact. 2 of them being young girls who were groomed and then experienced violence. Now we have a third woman who's come forward who said as she was a teenager and experienced this violence. This is a bigger problem that we have to talk about around the issue of grooming and child sexual abuse, which is a major problem globally, not just in our community, not just in the farmworker community. And so I feel an immense sense of responsibility and pressure in this moment to make sure that we are not just letting this moment pass, that we do not feel that just by painting over a mural or changing a street name or a school name or renaming a parade, that is actually all that is needed to address this problem. There's an immense amount of work that needs to be done to address the bigger societal problem. And I guess the last thing I feel is, you know, a bit of frustration, because we've been sounding the alarm for so long about this issue. When 90% of farmworker women in the 80s said sexual violence at work was a major workplace problem for them, and then over the years have continued to say at rates of 80% and 65%, the various studies that have been done, these are incredible rates in which people are saying this violence is happening to me, an issue that is taboo, that we don't talk about, and they're saying this is happening. And years into the work, like, I've been doing this work now for almost 30 years, you know, almost 25 as an attorney. And it frustrates me that, you know, we are this many decades into addressing this work, and there are people who are doing it before me. And it feels as though people are hearing it for the first time. And that makes me question, like, what is it going to take to make people actually hear what we're saying and actually do something about it?
People or men, Monica?
It's people. It's not just men. It's people, right? And it's all ages. And so, yes, men have a lot of power and they are abusing it. They have abused it and they're not being held accountable. And there's a lot of work to be done on that front. But each time a survivor comes forward and someone says, oh, I don't think that happened, or maybe it wasn't that bad, or maybe he didn't mean that, or, well, maybe you shouldn't have dressed that way, or maybe you shouldn't have been flirting like that. Every time that happens, and you both know this happens, it's happening today somewhere around the world. Every time that happens, that is causing harm and it is silencing someone. And so, you know, obviously this is very personal to me. My whole life is dedicated to this work. And I feel like in this particular moment, we as people who are leading in our communities, we actually have to be courageous enough to make sure that we don't let this moment pass without making real change.
Absolutely. And you know what? We feel your frustration. We share it. We hold you. And I think You've said before that, the people that you serve is the people who give you the hope. And that is such a contradiction, right? Because they give you the hope to keep going, and then things like this happen, and that frustration gets in the middle, right? But we also know that that's what keeps you going, correct? And so, you've touched so many doors. You've, fought so many different policies. You've been in every election. Like you're constantly pushing forward, right? And centering the people, centering the women at the work that you do. And so, but I want to know, the same way that Ana was talking about how Dolores held that silence in her body, and we are very sure that took a toll in her body and her soul and in every possible way. How do you hold all of that in your body? And I'm asking, as a woman who also has to keep showing up, and some days, hope feels far away. You want to grab onto it, but it's just not there. How do you handle all that?
Well, I'm learning. I feel like, we're very good at helping other people, but we're not always so good at supporting ourselves. At least I can speak for myself on that front. So this is a practice I'm trying to learn. But, even after the news broke about Cesar Chavez, it was very difficult. I mean, I was shaken, and it was very triggering. And so I actually there were a couple of days where I said, I cannot talk about this. I need to be silent. I cannot do any media, because as you can imagine, I got a lot of media requests during that time. Like, I need to go inward. And so I think learning to say no, trying to set boundaries, being around the people who I love, you both know I like to create celebrations. I like to create opportunities for people to gather. That's selfish in a way, because it's for my heart too. Like, I need that for my heart. And I live in Fremont, Ohio, which is the place where I was born and raised. And being home is very important to me, because obviously my family is here. My parents are here, tios and tias, cousins, my husband and son, we're all here in this little town. But it's important for me to be here because I truly feel rooted, and that helps me to get recentered. When I'm out on the road, when you see me all over the place out on the road, I love being out on the road in community, but when I come home, it's when I feel like I can actually center and rest and recharge.
I'm glad that you mentioned, your home. And I also know that you have a little boy. It's okay that we bring him into the conversation, because he is an essential part of your life. And I wonder, with all of this that we're talking, and the responsibility that we feel as humans to each other, but also as mothers raising our children, what are the type of conversations that you have with him about the work that you do?
I always say that my son, he started walking, and then that meant he started marching. He's been marching since he was a baby. He didn't have a choice. No. And I think he gets it. He listens. He listens to the people. We take him to as many events and things as we can. And he's very grown up. He's just going to be 13, but he acts very grown up for his age. And I know that he's observing and he's listening. We talk a lot about the work in violence against women. And, I try to teach him the things I'm teaching out on the road. But one of the things I've been spending more time with him on lately is about my parents' origins. My father, because he started working in the fields when he was 8 years old, and he was in Mississippi and lived in the segregated South, he didn't go to grade school. My father did not go to school for the first time until he was a freshman, and that was because a farmer paid for him to go to school and helped him go to school. So he did not learn to read or write or anything until he was a teenager. And I talked to my son about that, because during COVID, my father was the person who actually did online schooling with my son. So he completed the first grade and second grade with my son for the first time. My son
Wow.
That is, but let's take a minute there. That's incredible, Monica. Oh my God. Talk about giving back to your parents after all the sacrifices.
I mean, he was helping me so that I could keep doing my work, and he was helping my son. But in the end, they ended up completing first grade together, and then they completed second grade together. And they got the honor roll. They also got in lots of they bickered, they fought, but Sometimes I had to be the referee between the two of them.
Oh, the stories this boy is going to have.
But I tell him the stories of my parents and my great-grandparents because, in the same way that my parents gave me the gift of understanding where I come from and the importance of never forgetting, I want my son to know that because he lives a very different life than even I lived. And my life was privileged, has been privileged. And so I want him to understand what it was like for my parents going to the fields, working in the fields, not being able to go to school. And, and he's very receptive to that. And I'm thankful that he's receptive to that because, some kids might be really bored and not interested, but he's listening. And I hope that when he grows up, that those are going to be stories that he can also share with his kids.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that because I didn't know that. And that's such an important piece of information that tells a story about you, how your family interact, and how the movement actually and the work you've always done incorporates into your real life at home, right? I want to move on to asking you something about, the women who are listening right now. They're somewhere in their 40s, 50s, even 60s. And, they have spent their entire lives being the good one, the one that is reliable, the one that no da problemas, right? And something in her is starting to crack in the wisdom era that we're all in because she's tired of being that woman. If she were your amiga, your comadre, from the woman who's already been through it, what would be your piece of advice for her?
I feel like I'm still going through it. I think that it's a process, right? But I think that the two things I wish someone had told me sooner was, one, to give myself grace, because I think we're really hard on ourselves. And I feel like learning to give myself grace, like not holding myself up to this impossible standard at all times, is so important. And I didn't learn it early enough. And I think that actually probably affected me in my mental health, certainly, and probably my health in other ways. So I think give yourself grace, and also don't be afraid to take a beat, because I think we're always kind of rushing to the next project, to the next thing, to the, even sometimes if we're having a difficult conversation, we might be inclined to just respond, and we don't give ourselves the luxury of taking a beat. And I think that is probably one of the most important things that I have learned, is just the importance of, you don't have to respond right away. We don't have to jump into the next thing right away. You can take a beat and figure things out and let go of that pressure that other people are putting on you, but also let go of the pressure that you're putting on yourself.
Ooh, and how do you do that? Are there any specific coping strategies that you have, or any, rituals? I don't know why that word sounded weird saying it here.
I like rituals. I like rituals a lot.
Don't we all? They've saved our lives many times.
I don't have it's more about kind of inner patience, just being more patient with yourself, So I think I literally just, I take some deep breaths. If something comes through that is I get sometimes really offensive emails from people, or, whatever, there's stuff that comes across my desk and I'm like, ooh, that didn't feel good. That didn't sit right. And rather than responding, I just shut my computer. I'm done. I'm not going to handle that right now, but being able to do that, say I'm actually going to withdraw from this, and I'll come back later when I feel like I can manage it. And so that's what I mean by taking a beat. You just have to say okay, I'm actually going to let me dip out for a second, and I'm going to come back, because if I respond right now, it's not going to be good for anybody. And also, that's not probably the best way for me to thoughtfully respond to the situation. So I don't have a ritual. Maybe I'm going to create one, and I'm going to tell you about it later. There needs to be a little song, or an om that goes with it or something.
You got to own it. No, because it's really just about the pause. You named it. It really is about taking a pause. There will be a coach who will create a framework and a whole book about it.
Please do not take my idea, coach out there who wants to do that.
It really just is taking a deep breath and saying you know what, I need to go regulate myself, because you are already a woman who owns her wisdom, who is embodied in her wisdom, embodied in her power. And that's how you have been creating in life. And that's really what Her Wisdom Era is about. We're talking about how there comes an age, a stage in our life when we really feel the most confident, right? Where we really have lived so much, have gone through all the trials, the tribulations, the challenges, and the beautiful moments, and can now say, like, I actually know what I am doing. But we also know that we don't do this alone, that there's always like a post that you tagged me on recently, I think it was this week, that was saying that you always want to be with the women that are going to be bringing your name and talking about you in those rooms, right? And you are that woman. But who has been that woman for you? You are surrounded by a lot of really powerful women in your life. Who has showed up for you?
First of all, my great-grandmother, Virginia, I think she taught me what it looked like to be a strong woman, like without any apologies. My mom literally shows up for me almost every day. I see my mom, and she's taking care of my son, and she's making sure that he's not hungry, and then she's making sure that he has everything he needs. And that's her way of also, of course, loving her grandson, but it's also backing me up to make sure that I feel that it's okay for me to do the work that I'm doing too. That's her way of supporting what I'm doing in the world. I'm just I have the best mom, and I feel very, very lucky to be able to call her my mother. And, but I have a group of friends from college who I call all the time. And actually, sometimes I think they're like, please don't call us Monica, because I know I'm going to ask them to do something. But, there's a lot of different people in my life, but I also want to name the people who, like, maybe we don't see all the time, right? So when I go to the grocery store and there's a cashier who says, how was your day? Or when I go to the doctor's office, and there's this one particular nurse at my doctor's office, and she's always asking me about my adventures. That's how she talks about my work. Like, there are all these people in our lives who, in their own way, are lifting us up and giving us courage and giving us some props. And I don't want to forget those folks, because to me, that's an important lesson about how are we showing up in the world. And we don't only want to show the best face for the people who we think are the most powerful. This is the way we should be engaging with everyone all of the time. How are you doing? What do you need? How can I support you? Oh, do you know about this thing over here? Like, that's how I want to show up in the world. And I don't ever want it to be about status or power, because I think then it becomes a transaction, right? And so I want to thank all the people in my life who are not the people that everyone knows, aren't on magazine covers or stages, but they're the people who really make the world go around every day. The list is long, as I said. Like Cristy Haubecker, I don't know if you know Cristy, but Cristy, she's one of the people who, when everything broke with Time's Up, it was very overwhelming. And Cristy was one of the first people to say, what do you need? How can I help? Right? America Ferrera, of course, she was one of the first people I spoke with in Hollywood after the Dear Sisters letter came out and they decided to start Time's Up. She said, what can I do? How can we work together? My squad, as I think most people know, a lot of people know that the women I consider to be in my squad are Tarana Burke, Jim Poo, and Fatima Gus Graves. Like, we have a tight group, and we're constantly bouncing ideas off of each other and, managing challenging conversations and situations. Like, those are women who I go to for wisdom and for courage, and just to have a sounding board. Anna, you are one of them, and there's so many. And again, I don't want to forget anyone, but I think that also should be a goal of ours, right? Is to try to create as long as a list of possible of people that we count on, and who we love and who we know support us, but also try to be the person who is also on other people's lists too. Like, just as much as it is for us to receive, it's, I think, important for us to make sure that we're showing up and reciprocating, because we're not gonna, I said to someone the other day, I said, winning for me is not winning alone. Winning is winning with other people. That's what winning should look like. Like, if I cross the finish line alone, then I don't feel like I really would have won. I want to cross the finish line with you. I want to cross the finish line with you and 5,000 other people, and more and more and more, right? And I think that's what we should all strive for.
Oof, my heart is full. I think we're ready. We received so much, and you are that person for me as well, Monica. You are definitely at the top of that list.
Thank you.
I want you to brag a little bit about what you are doing. Before we joined this recording, you said to us, I was rushing, I had to send a paper. You are doing your PhD. Tell us everything. Yeah, why now? Tell us.
I don't know if I'm going to teach, but I'm getting my PhD. Today is my last day of class of my first year of my PhD program. It feels incredible that that's even possible. I am really interested in the identity of women in rural America. So my research and my book that will be the book that I write as a part of my dissertation. It's about the identity of women in rural America. And specifically, I want to make sure that women of color in particular, are not written out of the history of rural America, as I think has happened. So that's what my research is focused on. And, when you think about the farm worker women and many other women of color who live in these rural communities, right now when people think about rural America, they think white men. And that isn't rural America. Rural America is very diverse. And so that's what my research is about. And I go to Bowling Green State University, which is by my house, about 30 minutes away. And why now? I think because, first of all, it's been a long time in coming, right? I've wanted to do my PhD for a long time. I am an academic at heart, and maybe I'll teach someday, I'm not sure. But I'm really at the point, and I think it's appropriate because of your podcast, The Wisdom Era, I'm really at the point where I'm thinking a lot about my legacy. And how do I make space so that other leaders can lead? How do I step aside so that other people can be the ones who are speaking at the conferences and on the platforms and being centered themselves and elevated. It's really important, I think, that we consider how we are making space for other people, because one of the things that we see happens is, especially in the nonprofit space, you can have somebody who's been running a nonprofit for like 30 or 40 years, or like just one or two people who are constantly being elevated. And there are so many leaders. I always say we are a leaderful community. The Farmworker community is a leaderful community, but we don't always get to see all the leaders because there's only a few people who are being focused on. And so one of my goals and one of my commitments is to make sure that as I think about my own work, that I'm thinking about legacy and what it means to move aside so that other people can be centered. And so for me, getting my PhD, it felt right in this moment as I'm thinking a lot about legacy and what the future of my work will look like.
And that is what her wisdom era is about, right? Like, you're so wise now to know that it's the right time to do it, that you can make the time and the space and the mental space, really. So congratulations on that. That inspires us a lot. So now we're going to move on to what we call our rapid fire questions, Entre Sabias.
Estás Entre Sabias in her wisdom era.
Ay, ay, ay.
So no pressure, but you're supposed to answer in one word, but it never happens, so don't worry about it.
Also, this is pressure. You guys want to see me stressed out? It's right now.
That's why this is the fun part.
We're like, you're so chill. You have such a chill voice. We're going to test that.
Yeah, exactly.
Ana, hit it.
Okay, vámonos. A word to define your relationship with power today.
Complicated.
Define midlife in one word.
Beautiful.
Finish the phrase, Mónica. My wisdom era feels like...
Freedom.
One thing you do not negotiate anymore.
Sleep.
She's been really good. She's sticking with the one word. I love it.
You said one word. I'm a rule follower.
I see.
Listen, you're winning.
Including us. All right. Dolores Huerta is...
My friend.
The word you use the most when talking to yourself.
That's a hard one. I think keep going.
Oof.
Yeah, just keep going.
Keep going. It's going to be okay.
Well, we love you, Mónica, so, so much. We admire you, and we are so grateful for your heart, for your work, for your voice, for the way you use your power and the way that you continue showing up for all of us.
Well, I love you, and I'm so proud of you, and thank you again for this gift. And I can't wait. I'm ready to learn. I need to learn about my wisdom era, so I'm going to be following along with everyone else.
Thank you so much, Mónica.
Thank you.
Her Wisdom Era is hosted and executive produced by Cristy Marrero and me, Ana Flores. Our producer and editorial coach is Laura Ubate, La Gran Lau. Theme music and sound engineering by Stephen Herman from Explosion Robinson, aka El Santo. Social media by Team Belú, the best. Branding by La Diosa Leticia Vidaurri. We are Her Wisdom Era, a global visibility and reinvention platform for Latina women in midlife. Follow us on Instagram at her.wisdomera and at Her Wisdom Era on YouTube and Substack.